So somebody said, and I don't remember the author, that if you want to, for evolution, you instead of arguing against the existing reality, you create a new reality. And I actually love that, and that's kind of what KI is. We've created a new set of tools, like what we feel like is a more somatic based and frankly more skillful way of inquiring, especially on certain things. Um, so we created a new something here, but part of that, yeah, so we already created it, but part of it is how we created it is by looking at the old and seeing in which ways were the old ways incomplete, or were they encouraging bypassing or avoidance, or in what ways were old spiritual practices reinforcing emotional repression, or not getting to trauma, or not embodied. Those are all the questions that we've dealt with in some way to have KI. Even if we didn't formally entertain those things, those are all things experientially we've had to go through to see the limitations of things and to create something new that is working better. So there's the philosophical explanation of something very personal, which I'm going to tell you. But I think just understanding that context for a moment is, some people have asked me to tell this story again because they say it helps people understand why I get on here and say the things I do. In 2018, because of spinal stenosis and a bulged disc and bone spurs protruding into my spine, I should say one bone spur. The other is a spinal stenosis, which is a choking of the spine. Suicidal ideation came in, and it wasn't just like random thoughts here and there. It was first steps towards a plan with an intent, actually taking the initial steps until my husband intervened. And then through the process, so there's a whole thing that happened there when he intervened, and I'll explain that. But at the point where he intervened, the pain was really, really intense, unbearable, actually, nerve pain emanating from the middle of my spine. And I was also operating with a few perspectives that are now gone, but these perspectives came from spirituality, medicine, and recovery / therapy. Those worlds. These perspectives were leftovers. They were not reality based. And so they were actually just perspectives, but yet they were being touted as being reality based. And so I bought into them, frankly. And I think a lot of other people do. So I'll leave for another day how recovery and essentially old model recovery contributed to my suicidal ideation because it had its own play, its role in that. And I'll leave for another day, although I've already shared that, how medicine contributed that. I'm just going to focus on spirituality. Perspectives in spirituality that really fucked me, I'll say it that way, is this idea that everything appears to awareness. And that one, plus don't dig. That pointer, that warning that only some teachers give. Actually, some traditions are quite skillful in embodiment and know how to dig into things, really deep work, but other ones will say, don't dig. And it becomes like a mantra, and it's almost said as if it's truth, like coming from the truth holder sometimes. And so everything arises to awareness, and then don't dig. And the third one is there is no self. So any sort of processing is suspect because there's no self to do any process or to get anywhere. Meanwhile, I have massive pain. So that doesn't go with that. Well, I tried to live in that belief-based thing, and it didn't work because those perspectives were playing on me in ways that I couldn't even see. So in other words, I wasn't digging. I wasn't even looking and thinking about how to dig into the unconscious because I was still operating on this paradigm to some degree that says you can dig, but don't dig too much. You don't dig into pain. And there was almost like a big warning sign on it, almost from my consciousness. You just don't do that. And I learned that from somewhere in the teachings. I learned it. And so I didn't dig, and I wasn't able at first for about a year and a half of really bad pain. I wasn't able to access the anger repression because of it. So I stayed in, well, actually the pain got worse over that period of time, precisely because I wasn't digging and I had a block to actually really processing that pain. And then the no self thing contributed in the sense that, like, subtly in my experience, in ways that I couldn't detect at first, there was this block around even wanting that to go away. It's like, that's ego that wants that to go away. And so I would sit just with it, I as awareness, sit with it and allow it as it is, and see it as just this arising among millions of other arisings throughout the course of the day. But this arising seemingly would stay there the whole time. And it's like my brain would focus on it even if the pointer was there, rest and let it be. My brain would still focus on it. And the stronger the pain got, the more my mind would fixate, would fixate on it. And so the question for me became, in the midst of that, like, what is that? It's like it's trying to get me to pay attention to it. That feels like there's probably some intelligence in it. But as I pay attention to it, it just seems to make it worse. It's like chronic fixation is the chronic pain. Like, do you know what I mean by that? You can't just kind of let it go if it's really bad. It's difficult. So I just really suffered over allowing, just sitting and allowing and letting it be. Meanwhile, I didn't know this, but there was massive repression in there. Repression of emotion and unresolved trauma. It's like all that stuff that had been missed through the years had just located in there. I did not know that. So I was doing what every good sort of non-dual person, that doesn't make any sense, but just go with it, does, which is allow it to be as it is. It's appearing to no one. Don't try to get rid of it because that's the ego. These were subtle programs. And then also the idea that everything arises to awareness. So even as I sort of caught wind from different sources that, hey, the chronic pain could actually be emotional, I was like, oh, well, if it is, surely it'll show itself to me. Which is kind of ridiculous, because if it was just going to show itself to me, why didn't it show itself to me in all those years before I got to the non-dual message? And why didn't it show it to me when the awakening happened? Why didn't this thing come into awareness? So after a while, I realized this is not going to come into awareness if it's an emotional issue. But there I was at this place, not having realized a lot of the stuff that we talk about now. So at the time when I was having debilitating pain and wanting to commit suicide, what was contributing to that was the sense that I don't have any options and there's nothing I can do. And there's no one to do it. And this is nothing but a sensation and awareness. This is a physical thing. And I looked around at the teachings, other teachers, and a lot of them were saying some of the same stuff. Like, well, go get medical help. Go to the doctor, or let that be as it is. Just rest with that. Explore it very gently. And I did all of that. But it was actually these perspectives that were contributing to the problem. So when my husband intervened that day, the first thing that I did was be able to take some medication. So I wasn't taking medication up until that, not at the right dose or the right medication. So I began to be able to take that, and then I went into a process of questioning really all of that, all of the sort of existing paradigms in spirituality, the stuff that gets touted, especially those perspectives. And then I also inquired into the Western medicine model and the idea that the mind and body is split, and also questioning recovery things that were playing into that, like the idea that I shouldn't use no matter what, because I actually needed to take medication. So I questioned those things, and strangely, those things were playing on me in such a way that it was actually stopping me from healing. And that's why I want to talk about it, because I know that there are people out there right now who you're entertaining things that sound like they're reality based, but they're actually just beliefs. They're pointers, is what they are. But they get turned into like reality based sayings, things that we say, and they actually become showstoppers. And so there's going to be people there listening right now who you're sitting there and you're in pain, or you have some illness or a contraction, and you may be sitting there saying, just rest and let everything be as it is. Everything arises to awareness. Even if it's painful, I'm just going to rest and let that be, or I'm going to distract myself, go to the doctor, go to massage, treat it like a physical thing, in other words. And what if it's like the science says, that it's not actually physical, that it's emotionally driven? So what we're doing in those situations is, the word that I've been using is like we're fogging out around what's going on here in a really big way. And I don't even know if I can articulate it, but these paradigms are contributing to the repression of our emotions and the not resolving our traumas. These big perspectives are. I don't want to get too much into the philosophical, but really briefly, the beliefs that we find in recovery, for example, I don't want to go into all of them, but they can stop us from actually exploring the traumas that are driving addiction, because it's heady. So that it needs an upgrade, is my view, because that headiness, the conditioning of that, can actually go wrong. It can actually become part of the problem at a certain point. I lived it, like literally the recovery conditioning that says don't use no matter what, because when you're about to die or kill yourself, it's time to use something. And so we just have to be very careful with these stories like, I'm an addict, I'll always be an addict, if I use, I destroy my recovery. Let's develop something new. That's what we're doing with a new model of recovery, so that we can put to rest these paradigms that are actually in very subtle ways creating a lot of damage. Okay, and then medicine. The mind-body split, the way that the medicine treats the body as separate from the mind, is actually, I feel, dangerous for us. I'm going to get in trouble for this, I know. Because it's part of how we're fogging out. So we could be sitting here with illnesses or chronic pain, and because we're going to doctors who are not informed about the mind-body connection, we're sitting in a belief system that they reinforce in our lives, and it's like a slow cooker. We're just, you see what I mean? We're just, illnesses and chronic pain is just festering in our experience, because these paradigms stop us from exploring what's really going on, because they're like belief systems that come in and just say whatever they say, and then there's no exploration beyond that. And spirituality, frankly, is the same thing, in the sense that there's these showstoppers where it's like you and me who have illnesses, chronic pain, contraction, we're being told, and I was telling people up until 2016 that, yeah, a little bit of digging is fine, but you don't go digging into pain, you go to the doctor for that, or you just don't dig, period. You don't dig deep, period, or just rest and let everything be as it is. Don't get busy trying to get rid of that pain. Those are showstoppers. Because what exactly needed to happen was the deep dive, the digging. That's exactly what needed to happen for me, for the healing to take place. What literally had to happen was stop believing that everything arises to awareness. Everything arises to awareness except for everything that doesn't. So what doesn't is the stuff that's festering in our bodies, the repression and the trauma that's manifesting as pain. So I just feel like I know I'm not the only one, and there's just people sitting out there, and they're going down with the ship, just like I was. with all these showstoppers, these things that stop us from actually doing an intelligent, creative exploration of what's actually happening in our experience, like why we're getting sick, why we are in such pain, why is the abiding as awareness difficult, what is being missed. And in my view, this is what I call I say it all the time, the great non-dual bypass is the missing of this unconscious material here, the trauma, the repression, the shame, the core woundedness that's actually it's literally being bypassed so much in spirituality that it has to manifest as pain or contraction or illness before it'll even get our attention. That's how much we're bypassing it along the way in spirituality, if we are. I mean, because I know that there are people in traditions who don't do all that bypassing. But I want to say to you, like, because I know that there are people out there saying right now, yeah, well, I'm one of them. Like, I don't think I've bypassed. You would be the last to know. Like, when you're going down with the ship, it's an unconscious state. You're the last to know because your beliefs are masquerading as reality. You wouldn't even recognize that you have beliefs. And so if these beliefs are keeping you from exploring this unconscious material, then it's like you're really going down with them until this thing that's driving your pain or illness manifests as something that gets your attention. When it gets your attention, and like for me, nothing else works, you finally start breaking through the barrier of these perspectives, these beliefs that are really very, very much based in separation, in my view, like the idea that the mind and the body are split, or that everything arises to awareness. Because if there are things, and there are, that don't arise to awareness, these are the unconscious control mechanisms that are we're controlling our emotions to stay safe and get love, and we're responding, trauma response is happening. These things are very much part of consciousness. So when we say things like everything arises to awareness, as if that's how reality really is, that's not, because these things are not arising, and yet we're being influenced by them constantly. And so you could just be sitting there with what you think is reality-based paradigm. Like, everything that I need to see will arise in some way, and that yet these things are designed not to arise. You see how you mistake it for reality. You wouldn't even know. You're hearing it as a pointer. It seems very innocent, actually, when you hear it that way. But suddenly you're programmed over time when you hear these things like, there's no self. Everything arises and falls to awareness. Just rest and allow. See everything happening to no one. Keep hearing it. Suddenly now the mind is believing it, and you don't know it, and it masquerades as reality. So that's what I mean by going down with the ship, because in that state, if you're believing that, then you're not probably looking under the hood. You're not doing that digging into the unconscious, because you don't even think that stuff is even relevant. Thinking that everything arises, you wouldn't even go there. That to me is a massive bypass, actually. And I think we're going to know it in years to come, as we're able to look back 10, 20, 100 years from now, 200, at the way that we looked at the spiritual awakening thing. I think we're going to be seeing things very differently at that point, because of these blind spots, these paradigms that are swirling about, that are literally being used almost in the way by the consciousness to stay safe and to not actually embody the realization. So we're just we're sinking our teeth into these perspectives that are showstoppers. And every belief that you land on, you essentially land on it for some utility. So we actually don't even realize it, but we're landing on these things because they make us feel safe in some way, as if we know the nature of reality. And we discovered that in KI. You can actually see that your reliance on these perspectives is actually coming from a need to protect yourself and stay safe or know something or control or, yeah. And so if you don't see that, then you'll continue to think you're just seeing reality. You don't see that you're landing on these things for a sense of safety. That's what I mean. Like, our systems are intelligently keeping us safe, emotionally safe. And one thing that they do is we just hook into these things. They're just like life rafts in an ocean. You know, the vast ocean of being is a mystery. And you cannot ever capture it by any of these phrases or anything. Everything arises to awareness, or even the ocean and the waves are one. The waves come and go in the ocean, but they are none other than the ocean. It sounds really good. And to a certain degree, it's true. But what I'm saying is you hear that over and over again. What does that tell you? What do you start to learn after a while? You learn that everything is visible. So there are the waves. Yeah, I see those, the thoughts, the feelings, sensations, sound, things. And then the ocean, awareness, being, or whatever. And you verify it. It's like, that seems true. Like, it's actually just a pointer. But you start taking it on subtly as, this is the way things are. And then subtly now, you're not even looking below the surface. You're just assuming everything's going to rise as a wave. Meanwhile, things under the surface are happening. You're just enjoying, or just ignoring them because of your paradigm. And then, even if we become open to kind of looking below the surface, the question is the skill there? That was another thing. Part of the suicidal ideations, even if I wanted to truly get to the root of that trauma and that repression, I couldn't. With any of the tools that I had used, not only my own, but any of the other ones out there that I knew of, none of those got to the repression. So I had to not only chuck all those perspectives, but essentially just chuck all the tools and start from scratch in a way and rediscover my experience without these perspectives and these old ways of inquiring getting in the way. And then things started to happen. So there's always making room for something new, but you have to challenge the old. That's what I'm saying, is this quote about we just build a new reality is not entirely true, because there has to be some questioning of the structures that are existing in our consciousness first before we can even create or open to something new. And these showstoppers they really get in the way of that natural evolutionary creative process that I think will eventually lead us to healing. I think that we have the capacity to heal within us so many things, but these perspectives we're going to have to really challenge and inquire in a lot of these worldviews and scientific perspectives and spiritual stuff, and almost like come to this freshly with new tools and a new perspectives. But my point is I had to go through all that. All of that had to be challenged, the old stuff, before even something new could happen. And that's exactly what people find in KI. And I'm sure that any modality that challenges existing structures really directly, you would have this experience. But when people get here and they start seeing how much of this unconscious material that wasn't arising to awareness, how much of it is involved in our suffering, how much of it is involved in our pain and our illness, but also just how much we bypassed it. Anecdotal stories of people who are now or have been questioning existing structures and existing methods in order to even be able to come into KI and open to something new. It's not like we're leaving all of it behind, but it's almost like you have to transcend it and include it. You have to okay, so that kind of self-inquiry is good. I like that. But what if there's a more skillful way? So I've got to question that old way a little bit to make room for something new here. that doesn't mean that I have to throw the old way away. I just have to question it enough to make room for something new. And that's what people are having to do. So they're having to question their spiritual practices. They're having to question their teachers. I'm inviting them to question even me and this practice, because eventually everything is transitional. So when you come to KI, even that, you're not going to be here for life. You're going to be moving through it. But questioning all the old, the teachers, the methods, the paradigms, the beliefs, the assumptions, and it actually happens naturally. So I don't have to encourage anybody to do that, because what happens is, as they start to use these sharper tools, they just start seeing what's going on. They see that, oh, I have cleverly been involved in practices which cleverly keep it from me. Like, these practices are created by humans, and humans are very clever at avoiding and actually like creating structures around the avoidance. I mean, I really think this is much bigger than we even have any idea. But I think 50 years, 100 years from now, we're going to look at spirituality as kind of one big trauma shelter. To a large degree, it's a trauma shelter. It's a place where people go who are very traumatized or repressed and wounded. And coming from that, it was created. So a lot of the practices in the text were created by people who were experiencing that. And so if they are repressing or avoiding deep pain, they can easily build it into practices. And that's what I'm seeing, is that, and I know that this upsets people when I say it, but the thing is I'm just going to keep saying it, because I'm not trying to make friends here. I'm trying to just be as honest as I can about my own perspective, how I see this for myself. You don't have to believe me, but at least look at it. Isn't it possible, first of all, isn't it just possible that humans, when they create spiritual practices, they create them in a way that help them, unconsciously help them not go to certain places? If our systems are already designed to like repress and suppress and avoid things and tuck things away and not deal with issues, then those same human beings are the ones that are coming into spirituality, creating these methods and teachings. And people say, well, but then as they wake up to their true nature, they're not going to be putting forth these methods and teachings which are still repressive or not embodied. But that's the part that's hard for people to understand. It's hard for people to understand that someone could awaken to their true nature and have unresolved repressions or trauma. And all I can tell you is, it's actually, all the evidence is there for you. It just doesn't show up like that. So the stories of the scandals with teachers, the chronic pain, and I'm not the only teacher. There's a history of teachers with chronic pain, illness, like scandals, divorce, cheating, sexual abuse, crossing lines. All that stuff is the evidence of the unprocessed stuff that teachers are carrying around. So no, you don't want to just assume that because someone is out there teaching that they're a completely clear vessel who's not putting forth teachings that are repressive or practices that are repressive. I just don't think you want to make those assumptions, because you can really be led, just like I was, into a sleep around something. Really, that's what it is. It's like falling asleep, because the pointers are not being used in the right context. They're not being explained enough, and so people are being programmed. And sometimes the teachers aren't. They just keep saying it. And what we need to do is some deprogramming around it, because the paradigms can create problems, right? I know that this pushes buttons, and I'm fine with that. But I don't want to just leave it there. I want to talk about that for a second, because my buttons were pushed too on this. I'll just briefly tell this story. I was walking around with these perspectives and in a really bad place and periodically suicidal, as I said. before the suicidal ideation came, Dan McClintock and I were sitting in the hot tub that we talk about in Palm Springs developing KI, and my pain. And here's another thing you should know about KI. It'll actually bring pain and contraction to the surface so that you can work with it. And that's actually one of the values of it. Because when pain or contraction is back in the unconscious or deep in the body, it's got a lot of programming running things, but you can't access it. So the pain started to get worse. It had already started to get worse before that, but it started to be more obvious. And this is a pain that I literally avoided for years. Massive avoidance of this. And I wanted to continue avoiding dealing with it. And I was categorizing it as a physical thing. And that I realize now is part of how I was going unconscious around it, because that was the medical perspective. The medical perspective is that I was buying into was that a body can just have pain independent of the mind. It's just not the case. But I believed it back then. And so Dan said to me, "Are you sure that's physical? You might. What if there's programming there?" And actually, because again, as Dan is a really sweet guy, and the way that he delivers information, he could like just be kicking your ass, and it feels good. It's like, oh, okay. But it really did sit with me what he was saying, and I was mildly triggered by it, because so if you're at least mildly triggered by what I'm saying, then can we just have a heart to heart for a second? I get you. I've been there. Like, I know that feeling of like, even if he's saying something that's true, I'm going to try to find something that's wrong with it. Like, that's bullshit. That feeling of like, even a mild trigger, like this guy's fucked kind of thing. So I get you, but just hang out with me here. Don't let your trigger turn me off quite yet. And then I am in a marriage with Chester. So I've been with Chester for 4 years, and he was with me during the worst of the pain. After Dan and I stopped developing that work, I went to live with Chester in an RV in Southern California. And I was in Hollywood RV park one night. And the pain was really bad. And Chester had to carry me in the RV. And as we were going into the RV, I was having trouble walking. And he said, "Are you sure this just isn't stress?" And because he was somebody very, very close to me, you know how you pick a partner who just knows how to push whatever buttons might be left? Yeah, that's Chester. So that button was pushed, and I was actually really triggered by that. Because, so now I want to talk to you. If you're actually really triggered by me, I can relate to that. Okay, so don't click out yet, because I know that feeling. It's a feeling of anger and defiance and even maybe some shame. Feel that if it's there, or maybe even some fear, like, well, what if he's right? Ride that trigger out for a moment. Just let that be if it's there. And so you can hear me a little bit more. Because I think that the trigger that you may be feeling right now, some of you are not triggered. You're like, yeah, what he's saying, yeah. But some of you are triggered. The folks that are just resonating with this, they're going to eventually probably find their way to this work, because they don't have that huge block there. But the ones that are triggered, you have an opportunity here that is priceless, because I moved through my trigger and my situation was healed. And I can't promise that for you, but I had to move through those initial triggers of feeling shamed and getting angry at Chester. And then the healing literally started right then. As soon as basically what Chester was doing, it can feel like gaslighting. Especially how someone delivers it. If you're dealing with something where you really think it's a physical thing and you're very adamant about that. But yet, so doubt. Let's talk about doubt for a second. When you really don't know what the root of something is, you have to believe in something. We don't know the root of something until we discover what that is. And until then, we're guessing and we believe that it's physical. But it can feel, again, like reality. It feels like reality, like this is physical, but it's actually a belief. And your trigger is coming from the doubt right now in your belief. And I saw that. I've seen that many times before. But my trigger towards Chester was actually my own doubt and my own belief systems around this is physical coming to the surface. So it's like the shadow that happens in relationship when you get defensive when someone's saying something. Sometimes our defense is actually our own doubt. And what it's showing us is that we're believing something and we haven't tested that out to see if that's reality. So the doubt's coming up. But if we're not conscious of the doubt, then we're just going to fight the other person and try to win the argument. What I did is I became conscious of the doubt within me, which is essentially the same as the trigger, the shame and the anger, and I had KI, and I inquired into it, and it fell away. And that was the beginning of seeing that maybe it is emotional. There was an opening there, but not until that. See, letting go of that old structure. I sit with people and I hear them say things like, well, I know mine is physical. And sometimes I'll say, well, how do you know that? And sometimes I won't, but don't wait for me to say it. Here's what I would say. Go through this process with yourself. Good old Byron Katie comes in here. I think I like her inquiry for certain things, and this is the kind of thing that I like it for. Can you absolutely know for sure? Is it absolutely true that your chronic pain or illness is physical and not emotional? Is that absolutely true? If it's not absolute, if you can't know it's absolutely true, how do you react when you think that thought? What do you feel? And then who would you be without the thought that my pain is physical? Who would you be right now without that thought? My pain is physical, or my illness is a physical disease. I may have gone through that too quickly. So you may want to just stop and do that process. But my point is, we can't know. Science is not an absolute. We cannot know whether our particular condition is really physical or emotional, I think, until we rule out the emotional. So what I say to people is, if you're sitting there with this belief that it's definitely physical, but you're having doubts about that, why not come and explore whether it is? And you can start by just going to my YouTube channel, go to the video, Are You Repressing Emotion? And just sit with me through a short video and let me do a somatic test with you where you test out whether your body is, whether you're holding back, repressing any emotion. And if you discover that you're repressing emotion through that, that's an indication, especially if you get a hit in the area of like pain or where a symptom is. So let's say you're feeling into some area that has pain and you get evidence of anger repression. Once you start seeing the evidence of emotional repression, now you're actually doing an investigation to discover the degree to which this is caused by emotional stuff. And then that's where people get into KI, and they actually discover that when they go into the pain, not only is there emotional repression, but there are layers of shame that have been avoided and that are hanging out there. Other forms of repression and trauma, imprinting from trauma, like memories and programs based on things that happened to us when we were young or earlier in life. All of that is discovered if you can just walk through the door, because many of us are sitting there like, this is physical. And so we won't even take a step, because remember, if it's not physical, then you're operating on a belief system, and that belief system is stopping you. So if you take one step towards my video, Are You Repressing Emotion? You're taking a step, and you're not relying on belief anymore. You're going to start exploring. So you take one step. And then if you find evidence of repression, that belief system will start to erode, and you'll start to see there's something emotional here. And then if you go into KI, we'll show you the tools that literally, like within seconds, we can show you what your pain is made of. Like seconds or a minute or so, we can show you various things that are connected to your pain that are emotional, psychological. And that will just further erode the idea that it's physical. And then you're in the process of, well, I can't say. But for me, it was a process of healing. When these paradigms were broken down and I actually saw that it was emotional, then I could direct my inquiry into the right areas. And so then, yeah. But before that, there could be no healing. And there wasn't any healing. The other thing about healing is I think many of us, or some of us, would like to find, and I'm guilty of it too, when I was in a lot of pain, where can I find the person or the thing out there that if I can just do it one time, I can have a miraculous healing, and then I won't be in pain anymore, I won't have cancer. And what I say is, like, if there are healers out there like that, go to them. Definitely. But what I learned about healing is that the body is, what I say is, like, the body is the intersection between emptiness and form, or that's not the right way to say it. The body is like the intersection between awareness and the world, form. So, how does that tie into this? So the healing that I experienced was very much not just a body thing, but it was I'm reluctant to say healing in relationship, because it implies that there's someone there that's broken, but it's authenticity shows up, transparency, vulnerability shows up, because when you're holding back emotion, you can't be vulnerable, basically. By definition, you can't really be emotionally honest if you're holding back primary human emotions in your relationship, or you're holding yourself back, or you're not speaking your mind, you're not saying what you want or need, you're not setting boundaries, you're not letting people see you, really see you. Intimacy might be an issue. So the healing that I discovered is definitely on the relational level too. The human is a human transformation. It's not just it wasn't just a physical healing. So why would we want to rob ourselves of that? So if your pain or your contractions actually has emotional roots, then you're going to see whatever programs you see in there, you're going to see that manifested in your life. They're literally, the inside and outside are one. So when you discover in the pain or the contraction that you have commands to hold back anger, literally in your life, you should see relationships in which you're holding anger back in your voice. So all that's manifesting in that way. So when you lift the anger repression, that changes. You're not holding that back anymore, or your voice. So that shifts the dynamic of that relationship or those relationships in all sorts of ways. It can. Mostly for the good, actually, because you're getting rid of people that you're trauma bonding with, or you're not getting rid of them, but you're not acquiescing as much and going along with things that don't resonate. You're setting more boundaries. You're living your life for yourself more instead of for other people, and not caring so much about what they think. So the point is, in my view, a healing that's worth its weight in salt would be one that actually has, where you can see the changes in your life. What's the point of having, what would be the point of, like, okay, so I don't have pain, that's good, but my relationships are just kind of dysfunctional, or they're not completely authentic, but that's fine. But if the inside and outside are truly one, then the transformations that we notice within ought to manifest as something external. And if they don't, is it really been a healing? I guess is what I'm saying. Because for me, the inside and the outside, that's been a definite insight there. So that's a way in, actually. I'll just leave you with this. That's a way in to see, because this unconscious material really hides from us. Just look at your relationships. Right now, pull up the people in your life and just see what's here. If I give you this inquiry, see what comes up. I can feel and express my emotions freely to everyone. I can feel and express my emotions freely to everyone. Or another one is, if you want to try this one, I can be myself fully with them. Just see what comes up in terms of objections. Rest and allow these. Whatever the mind says, just allow it. Rest and allow. There's energy with the thoughts, allow that too. I can be myself fully. And I want you to notice in the body, do you feel that the certain area where pain or contraction is kind of lights up there? It contracts, or you feel it, and then some thoughts come. There you're seeing that the inside and outside are one, because we're pulling up thoughts about your relationships. And this inquiry is, I can be myself. And then if there's some objection, like, no, as if in relationship I can't do that, you also notice there, feel that in the body? No. So the inside and the outside are one. So this interior work ends up being transformative in both interior and exterior. There isn't really a dividing line between those two things. But just for purposes of talk, I'll just sit with you a little bit, come back to this inquiry. I can be myself fully. Just see if there's anything that comes up to object to that. Just let that be. And just rest. At some point, just let everything, as you let everything be, just you see that everything is arising and falling there. Just come back to noticing, being aware, resting as awareness for a moment. You can always come back to that inquiry. It just shows you what's there in terms of holding back. But the point that I was making is, there's a holding back going on, or not being yourself, whatever that is in relationship, and then that corresponds directly to feel that pain get activated, or the contraction. That's not a coincidence at all. That's direct experience. It's showing you that this pain here, or this contraction, is maybe not what you thought it was, that it has something to do with emotional issues or unresolved trauma, repression. Maybe you already knew that. But moments like that where you see evidence is when it gets harder to go back to the idea that my pain or contraction is just physical. You might then tell yourself, well, it is still physical, but these thoughts just stress me out and make it worse. Fine, that's a good enough reason to go explore. But what I found is, as I kept inquiring, the pain went away. It wasn't that the stress of these stories was making it worse. The stress of these repressions was actually creating the pain. It was the source of it. You may not see it now, and it may not be the total source of your pain or your illness, but how would you know until you go explore that further? How would you know whether repression is truly the answer to your pain if you don't actually lift the repression? If you keep seeing evidence of holding emotion back or trauma, how would you know? and that's the question that I took with me. I can't possibly know the extent to which this pain is truly emotional until I resolve those emotional issues. So I sat for months and just did inquiry on these particular emotional issues. Come to find out, there's no pain after that. And that's when I knew. See, because up until that point, I kept thinking, well, there's going to be a point in here where the emotional inquiry doesn't work anymore, and there's just going to be the physical pain. But every time I was left with what I thought was physical pain, I just continued, and I saw more, and the pain left. To me, that's the only way to know. Because before that, you are either just going to a doctor and relying on whatever knowledge they have, and especially if they think the mind-body is split, you're relying on that, and they're telling you something, and you're not investigating it directly regarding whether it's emotional. So see that? All I'm saying is investigate it, because if it's not emotional, that investigation will show it to you. It'll show you that this is not actually emotional. So I need to be going to the doctor only. But you might learn the other way, which is that it is emotional, but you're not going to know until you explore it. You can definitely explore it with any self-inquiry practice that you're already using, but what I'm saying to you is that we've developed some tools that we feel are more effective at not hiding it from yourself. So just start with that video, Are You Repressing Emotion? I'm pointing up as if you can go up and click on it. But you can. Go up and click on it, or find my series of videos list and just find Are You Repressing Emotion? And then if you find evidence of emotional issues behind pain or whatever, Killaby Members Area, and then we'll dive deeper into that. Go to Killaby.com. Drop down menu at the top. Scroll down to go to Killaby Members Area. See you there. I'm going there now.